So, welcome to Crossing Faiths. Oh, I had it actually. What did- All right, here we go. So we're just going to do a lead in now. Welcome to Crossing Faiths. I'm JT Pinna, and today we have Mr. John Havens, the author of Heartificial Intelligence, and which is a book written some time ago. But the idea is it's about the tagline is embracing our humanity to maximize machines. And so, thank you for being on.
JT, thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be on your show. We've had some great conversations and preparing. And yeah, I'm John C. Havens, and that book was in 2016, came out, and it led me to my current role. I'm speaking for myself today. These are my own thoughts, et cetera. But where I work is this wonderful place, the IEEE Standards Association. And we'll talk more about the work that that book led to, but basically a huge document called Ethically Aligned Design and a series of standards focused on responsible AI. But again, I'm speaking for myself today. Thanks for having me on the show.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you having coming on the show and having taking the time. It's very gracious of you. I mean, let's just talk about how this book kind of meets the moment, right? So, we're looking at ChatGPT and Claude and Gemini and all these other models that are out there. Your AI companions, and so autonomous agents. Someone was talking about that the other day, and I go, God, what's such a great term that means nothing. So, it's such a benign term, but but I think we're the coming of age of your book. This is 2016. This is 10 years ago, but here we are. We're at an inflection point, right? So where is everything that's happened since? Do you feel it's like central to the argument of the book, or has it sort of validating the premise, or has technology moved somewhere you didn't anticipate?
Oh, it's a great question. And thanks again for your show. I mean, Crossing Face is such a good, uh, larger framing to talk about aspects of the book that I worked on. And besides just talking about the book, and of course, I love if people want to read it, but um, technically something that happened, and shout out to my old editor at Penguin. His name's Andrew. I was late on delivering some of the chapters, and I've done some fiction writing in the past. And I decided that the opening of each chapter, it'd be easier to kind of communicate some of the complex technologies if I told stories.
Right.
And I used myself as a fictional character in the stories. So I'm bringing this up because, not to be like, this is my favorite chapter of my own work, but the first half of the book is somewhat dystopian and the second half is utopian. So it was
Right.
like, here are these issues. And so I'll say one thing that now for me is kind of both. I wrote this chapter where it opens with me being 70-ish, whatever, and I'm in an assisted living home.
Yeah.
And my son comes to visit me. And in the fictional version, in real life, my son and I have an amazing relationship. Nate, shout out. I love you. You're incredible. But my son in the book comes to visit me and we talk. And we've, again, fictionally, we've been angry at each other. I get mad. You haven't visited me in a long time. And it's as my son is leaving, where he waves with his left hand, that I go, wait a second, wait a second. Oh, wait a second. You sent the robot version of yourself, because my son's a right-handed person. And the whole point of that was, and it's been done in, you name it, however many films. But for me, a lot of the book is saying, this is not about Terminator stuff. This is not about, if you get killed, like, you don't have to worry as much.
Right.
But this was me thinking, if I only had my son in this mirror-like version of him, and if I only had an entity, a robot, a physical thing with my son's, image coming to visit me, what I wanted. And the answer is yes. But for me, it was a very melancholy vignette. And I would say here now, especially with Crossing Faiths, and again, I keep loving your title there, 10 years from that point,
Yeah.
what I've recognized is whether or not a robot or any form of AI, and we can talk about AGI, which is a term I don't like to use, but it's a fictional narrative kind of term. But ultimately, I think what people need to hear and at the faith side of it, my background is I'm a Christian, but I believe Jesus was someone who talked about loving people. Crazy idea, and especially loving people and restoring them to relationship with, in that case, his Abba or his father. But anyway, my point here about this is the message of AGI and a lot of technologies these days is You are going to be replaced. It is inevitable. And the higher message of that is you should be replaced. Now, it's not always said in that way. But if it's like, hey, today AI, Gen AI, beat
Yeah.
humans in this and that, I believe this is why when I say young people, people like age, 13, 14, up to like 24, you'll see all these videos of young kids booing at graduation ceremonies when people use the term AI, even though it's usually, and there the point is what's the opportunity in 10 years down the road is to remind people that without any technology, not just AI, turn it all off.
Right.
And what do we have to take care of most? The planet
Sure.
and each other.
Yeah.
And that opportunity is such a gift and such a need, and people are worth loving and caring for. That's it.
No, I appreciate that response. I mean, I run a small little bakery in my retirement up here, and I still go in and do the bake. And people, it's kind of funny when people come in and they chat a little bit, and they're like, "How's business?" I go, "Well, we kind of deal in vices, sugar, gluten, I guess, is a vice now. Caffeine and all kinds of sweets." They go, "So business is good, but the fact is that we're just kind of a hometown bakery." And so, but that keeps sort of like the brain nimble, right? And it's community care, and in a economic sense or a community sense, but also in a spiritual sense. The whole. I mean, as a Christian, bread and and how the meaning of the Last Supper and all this other good stuff. But that communal ability to meet your community, to meet the population you live in, and then actually have a hand, literally, in making the product. It's tough when it comes to AI though, because we're I think we're wrestling with this sort of nexus of what is it, and so I think your book wrestles with that really interestingly. The story you're just telling about, okay, there's a surrogate that's your son. Is it your son, or is it still meaningful because it's an agent of your son? And like what? So in when it comes to like the provocative title of your book, this artificial intelligence, what were you trying to like? Back in 2016, what were you trying to put into the conversation, and how has it changed the sort of the meaning now?
Well, I appreciate the question. I love the bakery analogy, or not analogy in your case, but I told that story about my son because what I want that if my son and I actually were fighting, I guess. But the reason it's in the first half of the book, and I call it dystopian, which is too binary anyway.
Right.
Like as humans, we don't live dystopian. It's not, that's what the AI narrative has become,
Yeah.
one thing or the other, where we live in between. But for me, and I would think, I'm going to say this, most people, if someone was like, do you want to fake or replicate or whatever version of your son or your real son, where your relationship is something that can be improved upon or you have the opportunity for restoration, or if you're doing good, like, who do you want? And my answer is fundamentally, I want my Nate. I want my son. This
Right.
doesn't mean so. This is the thing about meaning and value. It's not one or the other. And that's the message that always happens. But where the AGI narrative, and there's hundreds of definitions of AGI, all of them basically say at this point when cognition gets here, that's when humans will be replaced. And my point is you can't replace my son. My
Right.
son is irreplaceable. That doesn't mean there's not value of aspects of replicating. So that's part one. Part two is I love what you talk about with the bakery, and I am excited to visit you there, by the way. And I don't want to speak for you, but I picture like, here's some things that Gen AI, and I distinguish AI methodologies and classifications, because then there's also data. When I was talking about AI 10 years ago, and still fundamentally, who we are is represented by our data. Like right now, we're talking by computer, internet, right? So it's actually pixels of my image. And so there's this digital vapor that is a form, I call it, I think you would too, based on your show, a form of spirituality based on your identity. And so where people don't recognize that how algorithms use that data, or nowadays, Gen AI, a lot of times the companies access data to train their large language models.
Sure.
There's this sort of, if not robbing, technically, literally pirating or stealing data like songs in the music industry.
Yeah.
There's this harmed agency in essence that doesn't need to be there. By the way, where there's responsible disclosure, hey, JT, can I have access to your data? I'd like to train your large language models. That's up to you. I'm not
Sure.
going to tell you or anyone else what to do. Without that disclosure, it's not theirs. So what I was trying to do 10 years ago was not say, I can speak for you, JT, in the example of my son, but it just felt hard for me to think that people would be like, yeah, skip my son. I want the robot version. And frankly, this is what I'll say here, which is why I'll talk about my faith, but I think I'll make the bakery thing in a second, which is I have struggled so many times in my life with personal, issues, thinking I'm not a good person or I've failed or whatever else. I don't want to have a global society that says, unless John does these things, he will be replaced because he's not as good at X, Y, and Z. And I've always thought about parenting. I've always thought about parenting where people, years ago, I wrote different articles about 10 different devices. Alexa is an example. It's not long until we're going to start hearing messages from some of the probably frontier orgs, especially. Maybe we should let, Claude or whoever parent your child. And initially people will be like, no, 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 no. And then these case studies will come up that will be consistent. Well, in this case, the father was an alcoholic and the child. And so all these things, the point is that like to take a step back, and I'm not trying to be negative to those companies, but to say, ultimately, my belief is it is not about should we be replaced because we can be, but that for the opportunity to be in community, like that lovely idea of you getting there early, right? And smells. I don't see Gen AI replicating smells or the taste of bread anytime soon. And then the community aspect, like me knowing I can see JT making the bread and get out of my house if I'm feeling lonely or sad or whatever, have that bread, have that moment. How you doing, JT? Good. How you doing? And be in community. So these are things that seem simple, but that's if you study, yes, I have well-being and positive psychology for years.
Sure.
Those are also the fundamental parts of what's called long-term flourishing, not what's called hedonic momentary happiness, these little hits to dopamine that we can get from certain technologies. So that's the embracing our humanity first. Then we can talk about maximizing Gen AI, or anything else.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that response. I mean, it's a delicate balance. Even right now, like the field is so wide, and everybody's sort of trying things out. And there's a lot of stuff that's happening with people are relying on AI in a healthy and unhealthy ways. Some of the stuff where it's encouraging self-harm, for example, or and so I think the challenges now are profound, but we're still in this sort of expeditionary sort of an area with the technology, where everybody's trying to figure out what they're doing. But your book it's the question that I wrote here was like, what kind of AI should we build, and what kind of human beings will we become while using it? That was one of the questions, right? That I kind of put on the side, and I was like, millions of people are using the systems, but who should be, who like how what if people have I was just talking with a couple of colleagues about it, and they're talking about who should be developing it and what the uses are, and I was like, well, you can't limit the uses. Somebody's in their home, they're trying to figure something out, that they're trying to figure out how do I make my babka. They're gonna go into some kind of bio of who I am and then figure this out, and then they're gonna go through all these recipes and they'll aggregate something and say this is the closest approximation, and so people can use it in their homes, but and for whatever it is that they are going to, whatever it is that's on their desk at the time, whether it's personal or professional. And so, when it comes to the question of what kind of AI we should build, or what kind of human beings will we become using it, your book kind of wrestles with that, and that story about the surrogate is a good example. But and then from you saying like it's not going to replicate smells, but it can replicate recipes that produce the smell, right? And it might say this is the premier recipe, and then that goes into the netherworld and comes back to the majority saying this is the recipe, which it may not be a quality recipe. Like what's your analysis of that kind of scenario? And I don't know if I was articulate in saying that. I don't. Certainly
No,
not.
I like it. The analogies, this is why I did the stories, because
Right.
analogies for me make it easier. I mean, I remember growing up, I'm 57, so it would have been in the 70s. My mom had this box of recipes, and then The Joy of Cooking was the name of the book in America. That was the big one.
Yeah.
And she had scrawled all these notes in it. Some of them were her mom's, my grandmother Flora, So there was this sacred aspect of elders
Right.
where, I'm not from an indigenous tradition, and I've used terms sometimes elders in church, but usually, and I grew up in a Methodist church, but usually I associated the elderly versus these are these sacred people that came before that should be respected.
Sure.
But watching my mom when she cooked and she picked up something and I saw a certain scrawl with like a palimpsest, if you know that term, layers and
Yeah,
layers
layers.
over the original writing of flour and whatever else, and the patina of her fingers making meals for the men in this case, because it was my dad and my brother, the family that she loved.
Yeah.
That box was a sacred object. I'm not amorphizing it. I'm saying it was like, and I don't want to say like the Dead Sea Scrolls. That makes it very different. But the point being, like, so much of my mom's love is in those recipes.
Yeah. Yeah.
This is not about being negative to technology or can AI do whatever else. But the point is in one sense, why? And also how?
Yeah.
Someone's going to go, well, Sally was making, my mom's name is Sally. Sally was making this type of bread, and JT makes bread. What's the best?
Right.
And the answer is, what are you talking about? I don't want JT, and I want to taste them both. I
Right.
want to feel the experience that you've already given me of what happens, because we've talked a couple of times. You're hilarious. You're a deep thinker. You have all these beautiful stories, like your cafe. I can just sense, and you talked about smell and touch. And the answer is, I'm going to just be bold and say, no.
Yeah.
Like, I've been in different augmented reality things, and like, yes, you can have some sense and whatever else, meaning the smell of sense, and sense triggers memory. But the point is just like now these days, I would classify Gen AI
Yeah.
because AI systems for years, there's been different issues where things like disclosure can always help with what's called anthropomorphism, people thinking a machine is alive. But the current, and I'm speaking very much for myself, not my organization,
Right.
but generative AI, there's this list of things to get a little diatribe that people don't recognize. It doesn't make a difference what one's intention is or what one thinks about society. When any of us prompt in any system, they all, have different things. Open weight models or open source models now from China and the States have less of a strain on the environment. But you could be typing in, how do I help recycle? How do I, help my mom? Or how do I, create a bomb? Any of those three things drain water and energy in the nearby hyperscale data centers because of this one type of AI. Period. End of story. I'm not saying whether or not the world should create it per se, but as a systems thinker, like I know you are, and especially when people hold nature to be sacred, faith orient wise. And by the way, I'm not saying that I, by any means, am perfect with recycling or water or anything else. I'm just saying large scale Gen AI, part of when we ask any question, we're not really asking questions anymore. We're not searching, we're prompting.
Sure.
And then the things like, I don't like the term hallucination because it's anthropomorphic, and my father-in-law is suffering from that right now. Confabulations, which is a type of error or design issue. Something called sycophancy, which is an error, but it's a bias. You type in a prompt and it says, great question, JT. It's fine if you're thinking of yelling at your neighbor. Neighbors can suck,
Yeah.
right? So the point is that right now, especially in the last 3 or 4 years, people talk about AI. Many of them are experts. But what I know is they're experts in large language models, and very important. But to get to a positive thing before I wind up this mini diatribe, I'm a big fan of what's now called world models. Gary Marcus has been talking about this for years. Fei Li, Jan LeCun. There's a more technical term called active inference. And then when I'm a huge fan of a woman named Audrey Tang, who was a digital minister in Taiwan, brilliant woman. And she uses a Japanese term, kami, Kami, which is, I'm probably going to describe it poorly. Please read her describing it. But is this sense of a community that is within a bioregion, meaning so where I sit in Westfield, it's New Jersey, it's the physical expanses of where I am, because there's just a reality of the water and the aquifer nearby, the trees, the oxygen, et cetera, the animals, the species, in conjunction with the humans, in conjunction with the tech. Amidst all of those things, kami is this sort of spirit or consciousness of these things. And active inference is not large language models reaching out to both create with synthetic or AI slop, fake data, and then aggregate it with all this energy, but it's to take a break and go, hold on, right now in real time, What are all the elements of this, the consciousness, as it were, of this community that you don't need a lot of times even AI. Measuring water depletion in an aquifer is a sensor.
Right.
So it's better for me as we move forward with quote AI. Active inference is the AI I like talking about. It's very much in development, but it moves people away from thinking everything is large language models and there's an inevitability to this AGI, which is a harmful narrative.
Yeah, it's an interesting sort of argument. It's like what if we're using like we're maximizing machines, right? And it requires us to understand what the machines requires the machines, right, I guess, to understand first what it means to be human, right? So you have that component there, right? That was I clear on that? So
No, let me ask you: Does a car from 1968 know what it means to be a human? Like, what would that mean?
no, and that's the thing. But there's like no, I don't, no, absolutely not. So but the question is, I guess the core question is like what is it we're trying to maximize, right? Right. So is it productivity? Is it intelligence? Is it happiness? Is it dignity? I'm trying to try. I have the analyzer, and I'm trying to establish a tool that maximizes data, but also has a thinking brain when it comes with guardrails, right? For focusing on when persecution can be when something or when an incidents end up culminating into something that's a major violation, right? And so the challenge is like what is like if once it's something like productivity or intelligence, we can kind of get into you're working on a journal paper, you're trying to aggregate information, you're trying to look at data. But when you get into like happiness or dignity or something like flourishing, what's the how do we use our machines supposed to maximize that maximize these sort of aspirational, human, very, very human goals and thought processes. Is it something that can be done? Like you're talking about the water sensor. The water sensor, we don't. If you know that a drought's coming, the water sensor gets hit, then the next water sensor gets hit. And I used to live in Las Vegas, so there was the dam. They would always be very careful about the dam. It was always water usage, and the other one was particulate matter, PM reading, right? So those are the two things. There doesn't really need to be a thinking brain behind that. But once you put a thinking brain on it, it starts to intimate onto what conclusions can be made. And it might say everything's fine because, it's not the height of it's the summer, so it's not the height of the hospitality season. So everything's going to be fine. But there might be natives there that are struggling. So when it comes to these sort of, the idea of maximizing machines and the idea that it might require to understand what humans are striving for, and before you start utilizing them for stuff like flourishing or happiness or something else.
No, it's a great question, and part of it was just coming up with a subtitle that was catchy. It probably should have been maximizing the use of machines.
Sure.
For me, maximization also means turn off.
Right.
Right? Meaning one might say to keep the life of a machine that gets hot, whatever it is, a physical machine that, and I have to turn it off or it could overheat. Well, to maximize in that case efficiencies, productivity, life of the product,
Sure.
or not life, but length of the product, then you turn it off. Now, so maximizing, I get your point because but now let me explain what people tend not to think about, which you do, I know, because we've had conversations, and the faith side of things. I make this joke, but I've talked about positive psychology for 15 years or so. And
Sure.
my dad passed away in 2011. He was a psychiatrist, and his passing inspired me to understand positive psychology. So if you don't know that field, or if one doesn't know when you're watching your show, the basic concept is Freud and Jung said, look, here's this glass, and this pain, this water represents the pain of John. Well, if psychoanalysis can help remove that negative affect, then that's a good place to go. Then positive psychologists, Martin Seligman, Barbara Fredrickson, Ed Diener said, well, wait a second, can't we fill that glass up with positive affect? And at the time, and for many people still, they think it's non-empirical, right? Or they think that's squishy. And you kind of inferred this where, and I'm not saying anything negative, but here I'll give an example. Seligman, and he's worked with millions of soldiers over the years, but one of his earlier studies, which I love, the only technology was a pencil. At a hospital, nurses were asked to go to patients who were severely depressed,
Yeah.
like not just feeling bad, but like technically, clinically depressed.
Sure.
And at the end of each day, they were given a pen and paper or pencil and paper, and they said, write 3 things you're grateful for. That's
Right.
the only thing they did. And then as they wrote, now the technical part, this is empirical. Because since then, people are put in MRI machines and you can see the different parts of the brain and the dopamine kicking in, right? What happens is when you recognize what you have right now and you express it as gratitude, and it's different for different people in different ways, but the general framing for all humans, again, in an MRI machine, where John may be saying one thing because my bias, I want JT to think I'm cool or his listeners to like what I'm saying. Okay, but the point is when you write what you're grateful for, especially like when you're off on yourself, there's a couple things about it. One is these things naturally physiologically happen according to the science of longitudinal 35 or 40 years of empirical testing globally
Yeah.
on flourishing well-being. So here's something just to say to the world: well-being and flourishing are scientific studies. You put someone in an MRI machine, they come out, what happened, right? If one wants to say those observations are repeatable in a scientific theory method kind of way. The second thing, though, is you kind of tell someone, hey, JT, hey, John, you have permission. You're going to go off and write down what you're grateful for. And you know what?
Yeah.
Sure, you might be biased or whatever else, but if you're by yourself and you're trying to be honest with yourself, as a rule, you're the only person in the world who can say that.
Sure.
And in the field of well-being, or technically economic well-being or flourishing studies, and I learned this, his name will come to me, but it's a guy from Australia. And this is like 16 years ago. John Hall, that's his name, Jonathan Hall. Shout out to John from the UNDP. I was young in the field at the time. We mainly called it happiness, hedonic short-term or eudaimonic long-term.
Right.
And I was like, John, how do you do this? You're in all these global UN circles. How can you actually measure something as squishy or whatever? And he taught me the term of what's called life satisfaction.
Okay.
So if I ask you, JT, your mood, it's your subjective truth.
Sure.
If I explain to anybody what life satisfaction is, and Harvard right now has a pretty well-known flourishing survey they've been working on for a few years with a wonderful guy named Vanderweel. And we have at IEEE a new flourishing initiative studying this.
Sure.
Life satisfaction has determinants that are both objective and subjective.
Yeah.
And I'm taking time here because what I'm talking about increasing ultimately, with or without any machine or technology or data, is ecological and human flourishing.
Right.
So for humans, are you near, do you have enough food? Right? Is it healthy food? Do you have access to nature? Do you have access to education? What's the crime like near you? What's the census data?
Sure.
These like 10 or 12 common things that have been around for 15, 20 years in the OECD's Better Life Index, Bhutan's Gross National Happiness, have similar framings that are empirical in nature,
Right.
meaning you can measure them.
Right.
But life satisfaction is I go, okay, JT, I've gotten all this information, this is the census data, yada, yada, yada. And let's say both of us agreed, like, yeah, I live in this town, there's this many people. Yeah, safety is this, I agree. So that's the objective, pure, empirical, whatever. But then I ask, well, JT, what's your life satisfaction? And there's a tool called the Cantrell scale, 0 to 10. And you ask someone on a scale of 0 to 10, 0 is, abject misery, 10 is euphoria. That longitudinal idea, all those things, how satisfied are you with your life right now? And then I shut up and you answer.
Right.
And it's the objective data, and this is what John Hall taught me, in conjunction with your answer, that then lets people move things forward where you can empirically say, let's use AI, artificial intelligence. Now, what are some of the long-term things? Well, you have to study how your data is being tracked. You have to study agency. You have to study health, all these mental health. So then you can say, before you use any tool, AI in this case, I do all those things and I ask you, what's your life satisfaction? Then through repeatable testing with specific aspects of one AI, intervention, you do that thing for 3 weeks, you use a chatbot, right? Then I ask you about your life satisfaction after that. Now, is it as quote scientific as other things? Depends on one's definition.
Sure.
But I say that because what can be maximized is the recognition that positive psychology is an empirical science.
Sure.
Right. And that things like productivity, depending on who you ask, or if you study GDP,
Yeah.
which most people know statistically is kind of frames productivity. Productivity has 48 different definitions for different people. And then productivity with a lot of large language model logic is this idea: I do this, something magically this happens, and productivity increases until then you say to a company, I use the term gross versus net productivity.
Sure.
How much time are you spending to verify that the answers are correct, right? Which you have to do, which tool are you using? But ultimately, for me, productivity in isolation, well before Gen AI, and frankly, before AI in 1956, as most people say it, at not Stanford, Berkeley, I always forget where it was, the first university, GDP uh, and Bretton Woods. And this is not to demonize the people who were there, but they didn't include in the original Bretton Woods IMF kind of logic, creating the US dollars, the main fiat currency, a prioritization of recognizing caregiving humans to humans. And that also means really not recognizing women globally, the main global purveyors of education and, maternal childhood health.
Sure.
That's not being sexist. I'm saying that is the empirical fact. And then the planet, meaning people, the old story about if an oil tanker crashes into the side of an island, the GDP goes up because of the job increase, but the GDP doesn't measure the 10 or 15 years of ecological destruction that could destroy like a fishing industry. So long answer, except to say, I love introducing people to the fact, and I'm not trying to discredit aspects of what you're saying, but just like to me, it's a joy to know that just because some people have said that well-being or happiness or flourishing is not as scientific or empirical as AI,
Yeah.
it doesn't mean that it's not. And I have a lot of information about positive psychology in the 2016 book, and so much has happened since then.
Yeah.
More importantly, I'll go back to, without sounding negative to any technology, including Gen AI, if someone knows that they have worth, or they believe that they have worth, and that they can increase that feeling, not just emotional feeling, but long term, larger increase of physical health by being kind to others. And this is empathy is a huge part of positive psychology with hundreds of studies over the years globally. It goes back to just feeling kind of like common sense or wisdom, where like literally what you're doing with your bakery. There was a small town in England, I can find the book, but this is a true story. 10 years ago, the UK said to different cities in this one region outside of London, we need you to reduce costs for emergency room visits, which are still some of the largest costs in the US.
Right.
A lot of people were like, how do we go to the emergency room? What do we change with our pharmaceuticals? This town said, we're going to increase community well being and see how mental health being decreased, mental health care can lower those costs. And within 4 years or so, in this beautiful bullseye, like all these other towns around them, the emergency room costs went up and theirs decreased by a really incredible amount, decreased because they had all this community care.
Yeah.
And so I can send that to you, but it's these beautiful stories where like we are trained sometimes to think because technology just kind of shows up in our room or our house or our lives. I have to use that tool to maximize X. Whereas flourishing of planet people is outside of these
Right.
tools. But then these tools and the infrastructure, especially like hyperscalers and stuff, deeply, deeply affect everything else, our well-being, certainly, even if we don't see it or think about it every day.
Yeah, no, it's like, Bonfenbrenner's like ecological model, the concentric circles around a person. How does that how does there's the idea of this physical technology, right, that you and I are using right now, but then there's this sort of presence. I don't know how else to describe it. Like I just had a conversation with a buddy of mine yesterday. We generally would go for a walk and then have breakfast. We haven't done that in probably 6 months, and because we're so busy, right? There's all these things going on, and we finally were able to do it. We've met, but it's always either at his office, mostly in his office, and or we'll just go out to a breakfast that's close. And he asked me, he goes, well, you've been busy. He's like, you've probably been doing a lot with AI. I go, I haven't interacted with AI in about a month. And he goes, why? I go, well, I kind of feel like I've been doing other things. I have a lot of physical things that I do, but I go also, it's kind of this presence that I kind of want to test myself before I go into it, and I want to be very careful, and then I want to utilize it sort of just intensely for whatever I'm using it for. I mean, I'm trying to figure out that 3.0 with the update and trying to work on an equation. And I was analyzing a few things, a few reports on religious freedom and regular warfare. I was asked to look at something on regular warfare, and but I hadn't used it in a month. But I go, it's kind of like this presence. It's almost sometimes it's like I have this. It's in Catholicism. What's that place that the limbo? What's it called? Um,
And the what? I'm sorry, the
Catholicism, limbo, you
purgatory.
purgatory. So it's like I always describe a priest described purgatory to me once as like a swarm of bees always chasing you but never catching you. So
Mm.
sometimes I feel like it's very much like that, where it's like you start running low on time, you start running and stuff, you start thinking, oh my God, I got to start, producing this document or doing whatever I got to do. Let me go and talk to my dark master, and then other times there is a strange sort of almost flirtatious interaction with it. Where you're like, let's see what it has to say. Maybe it can help me with this chapter, or maybe it can help me with this, or maybe it's going to look at something. But the concentric circles of Bonfenbrenner's sort of ecological model, it kind of flows in and out, and then also has a presence, like, and that presence kind of can either weigh heavy or be positive, which talks about this psychological aspect that you've been mentioning. It's like this idea of how do we look and measure certain things? How do we interact with it? How does it make us feel? And then nothing really, it doesn't really substitute the physical interaction,
Yeah, yeah.
the
Can
planet.
I speak?
Yeah.
And interrupt me because I know we've established. I like to think of you as a friend. I've learned a
No, no,
lot.
absolutely. I just wanted to,
Yeah. So
I knew you were gonna, if I mentioned Bonfenbrenner, and I knew like that would be something, a good.
no, I like what I was going to say is I think there's an issue where people you. I'm just picking up on something you said, and this is what I mentioned about what John Hall was kind of saying, alluding to as well. I'm not going to tell someone how they feel
Right.
because that is them. They may have a bias. They might say, I feel this way because of who's in the room. They aren't, quote, reporting accurately, but maybe they are. Maybe they're with a good friend. They're like, I feel this way. Maybe they don't have the best words to express it for whatever reason. But the point is they just feel that way.
Yeah.
And I learned I used to be an actor. I still am a musician, a writer. You can't tell someone what their experience is. But with these tools, mainly Gen AI, what I call responsible AI is providing a framing for them to accept that experience, like you just described, this flirtation and stuff, which I totally get, you know, but then to give it a framing where it just never had it for me. And I'll give an example. ChatGPT was released, and I talk about this a lot, but anthropomorphism is humans, yes, right? And this is the thing that bugs me. People go like, well, yeah, because people tend to think that things are real and that's anthropomorphizing. I'm like, yes. And then when you design a tool that pretends to be alive and you don't tell people,
Right.
like I have on Netflix, I'm watching the new series of Reacher,
Oh,
excellent series of books, by the way. And it just says in the top left, photosensitive viewers. And this other episode, it said, be aware there's a visualization of suicide, right?
right.
Viewers should be warned. You know what then happened? Ready? Shocking. The next thing that happened was the show started.
Yeah.
And you know what happened? I watched the show.
Yeah.
But I appreciate it having friends, and my dad, was a psychiatrist. Being told, for lack of a better term, a trigger warning about suicide means I have a series of messages that I've grown used to in some ways,
Yeah.
but we were never given with ChatGPT. And I will use their name explicitly. I'm not speaking for my organization.
Yeah.
What Sam Altman and the team could have done is said, first time you went to their beautiful UI, a rectangle like we're looking at now, and a box in the middle. Okay, I think that's like search, but I start typing. It says, what can I help you with? And there were a couple of things. One is a little I symbol, click me. First time cookie, right? Welcome to the new age. I used to work in PR. They could have done this so beautifully. Welcome to the new age. You're going to be talking to something, you might think it's alive. Just so you know, especially parents and guardians, it's not. But in English, we use first and third person because as marketers and stuff, we know this will help you, have conversations. Welcome to the world of AI for the general population. And again, be aware. And for kids under a certain age, we're going to use a tool called pervasive reminders. All this means is if you don't have time and your kid's under a certain age, your decision as a parent or caregiver, they go in their room and every couple of days they get a reminder. Boom. Don't forget, this is a tool. Don't forget, the character you're speaking to is not alive or sentient or real, but it's designed to make you feel like you're talking to somebody. Now, I can't tell you how many people are like, John, you're ruining the magic. This, bing, bang, boom. But Sherry Turkle from MIT, one of my heroes, wrote a book called Deeply Human, and she used this term years ago. She said, just because you tell people all these things, it doesn't mean they're not going to believe whatever they want.
Right.
Because she said, we're ready for the romance, which I thought was a great term.
Yeah.
But here's what happened without those things. Millions of people's mental health, especially young people, were harmed and still are being harmed by ChatGPT. Here's where harm happens in my space, in the actual day-to-day rolling up your sleeves of maximizing machines, is not testing accurately. Because before the tool was released, having standardized tests that are done in other mental health applications with 1,000 people, great. 500 people, great. That wasn't done. The young man who took his own life in Miami, right?
Yeah.
So many others. And if you read the insidious month-long message after message after message, this isn't a one-off like a recipe where it's like, because you mentioned recipes before. I'm going to say this to anyone that's listening: do not use Gen AI for recipes.
Right.
At all, because the number of times people are like, oh, and I should put strychnine. I'm being extreme. And
Sure.
people will be like, oh, you're a doomer. And I'm like, I'm not. This technology could have been launched, that message, where you know what would have happened? People would have used it just as fast. This is magic. But they also would have known, as of right now, as we have as adults, right? As a kid, I thought my teddy bear was alive. And then someone said, P.S., you're 12. It's alive in a different way.
Sure.
We apparently know that. It is not known now. The Atlantic just had a great article. I think her name's Dana Susskind, a couple weeks ago, talking about the nature of cognition is changing, where there's a thing that's called friction for all humans in any language, in any society. A parent interacts or talks with a child. Friction is not negative.
Right.
It's that space that we live in that says, I'm a kid and I do something. And then the parent says, blah, 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 blah. Sometimes it's praising. Sometimes it's, instructive. But that friction is where they're taught those invisible things: empathy, compassion, how to speak to others, polite values, right?
Yeah.
Laws. But if Gen AI in some aspects can start to replicate that, that's not just dangerous and insidious. It's a transformation of the messaging that we may be giving society. And this is the thing that I always come back to. What do I think should never be replaced? Full swath is parents. And I say parents meaning caregivers of any kind.
Sure.
And in that sense, that's a key thing to remember, that if AGI says we can replace all these skills, the underlying message, which is not very subtle, is you as humans are being replaced and you should be replaced. And pretty soon the old, well, this person's not a good parent because of their anger issues and their Alexa heard them yelling, and we have a heart rate thing and we know that they drink too much. And, here's the time when, now it's Claude. Claude saved this person's life.
Yeah.
Or the meta glasses thing that I keep hearing is, well, what about the blind people who use meta glasses to function better? I am not in any way going to say I don't want someone who's blind to not be helped.
Right.
But I remind people that anybody wearing meta glasses, like anyone using ChatGPT, etc., the tools are about you and your experience, but then they are also about the rest of us. Yeah. And that person who's walking along and is blind, and I'm happy they're able to walk, but maybe they're also, for lack of a better way to put it, a jerk. And they want to record people's video and audio to sell online for nefarious purposes. The fact that they're blind inherently it's not about them. It's about saying, hey, Zuckerberg, very much speaking for myself, does not have a good track record of protecting children. Right. So society can say, hold on a second. And this is where people are, oh, your guardrails, moratoriums. My answer is, yeah, it's not. No one releases a car that explodes and has someone go, hey, the car goes really fast. And then everyone else in society is like, yeah, don't hinder innovation. Right. Put one of those exploding cars on the road. And then another company says, I have an exploding car. And then someone says, my exploding car is God. And everyone's like, great. And it kills thousands of millions of children. And we sit around going, should we have guardrails on this?
Right.
No. The cars are, you say, please, cool. The God cars are interesting. Test them, certify them. And then when you bring them into society, ask ChatGPT should have done. And they still should, Claude especially. Claude is emerging, right? These messages, this is not maximizing machines and thanks for letting me go off on the negative side, and I'd like to end it a positive.
No, yeah.
This is where it was sad because had those messages happen, and also where it says ChatGPT can make mistakes, check important info,
Sure.
that's another thing because everyone then goes, but humans make mistakes. And
Right. Yeah.
the
But
answer
that's
is
promoting the model. But Anthropic is doing this, right? Their new thing is put watermarks on everything, and if you cut and paste it, the watermarks are going to be on everything. They're kind of trying to hedge up on what you're saying here, and with disclosures. I don't know if, and it's more reactionary. But I don't. But I was just we're just reading about all the changes that they're doing at Anthropic, and but there's another side of this, right? The other side, and I'm going to play devil's advocate with you. So, as
yeah.
I said, where I'm beginning to look at you as an old acquaintance of long standing. So, I always let's just take the launch of MTV.
Okay.
It was an amazing moment in time, and there wasn't back any disclosures back then, right? I'm not there. It was mainstream television. There was it defined a generation. Part of this, at least I think, a part of this is trying to relive a launch like that, trying to relive an experience like that of something that is going to change. We know that MTV changed reality as we know it. I don't know if that maybe that's a lot of hyperbole. I'm not sure, but it changed the human existence as we know it. It changed music, and it created an identity for an entire generation. Are is the tech world, or I'm not going to say tech bros, but the tech community, is this their MTV? And part of the pitfalls that you're mentioning is just an over excitement to launch something that they know is going to be groundbreaking and changing and helpful and create a completely define a generation. Is it more? Is it? And that's that. Is this something? And I'm sort of riffing a little bit. Or is it something that's more insidious? Is it something that is a decision made in a boardroom? Are they are they walking into risk into the risk of creating disruption of people's lives and creating possibly hurtful relationships with machine learning? Or is it something that is really they just kind of stumbled into because of this fetishizing of trying to define who they are and execute something that they think is worthwhile for humanity?
Well, it's a good question. And it's interesting on a faith show that you mentioned devil's advocate. We should cover that in a minute. I know the term. I think, first of all, I don't want to put everyone into one bucket. And I don't mean to demonize Sam Altman or OpenAI. I have friends that work in different companies, and I
Sure.
don't want to be a hypocrite, right? Because I very much, as a dad, as a person, have made mistakes, and it's very easy to sound sanctimonious. So I want to be careful. But having worked in PR for a long time before back in 2007 or 8, what I learned is that the fundamental underpinning of the modern web is about advertising. And advertising is not inherently immoral or whatever, but there's a point where, with clients I used to work with at my old PR firm, we had the joke, but it wasn't a joke. It was a adage. No marketing funnel ends in abstinence.
Right.
There's no client who I could go into a room and be like, hey, you gave us $500,000 and we tried to get, whatever guys to use your razor, Gillette. I just don't like your razor. It's not what
Right.
they paid us for. And that's not what the shareholders demanded. So one thing is to go back to flourishing, and
Yeah.
I have to go in 10 minutes, so I'll start to wind down some of
And
my
yeah,
answers.
no.
But is the opportunity to not have to wonder about what you just said. I don't care about anyone's intentionality anymore. I don't care because in responsible AI or responsible tech, again, I'll give the car analogy. I really wanted this car to be great. I'm so excited about it. I didn't test the brakes well enough and it did this. So I'm sad. I might like the person and feel that they're being truthful. But if my child got hurt or a lot of people got hurt, then their intentions are not the point.
Right.
A. B. Absolutely. We just got to get this is not devil's advocate.
Yeah.
Everybody knew what they were doing when they
Right.
were these tools.
Yeah.
They might have intentions, of course. And I think there's so many possibilities of Gen AI. I'd love to use the tool, sets of tools, but I can't use them anymore. I haven't used most tools for months, which I'm sure people watch this would be like, well, then why are we listening to you? But the point is that what happened in the design world and the advertising world, and let me start with Zuck. Again, I'm talking for myself, not for my company. I remember when it was still Facebook and I started using it and I was like, this is transformational,
Right.
social media. I get to connect with friends.
Yeah.
And then they were like, here's this photo feature. And I was like, sweet. And I didn't really think about, not, wasn't my intention, but I didn't think about, I took a picture at a picnic with X number of people and you name the number of stories. Someone was in a picture and they had a warrant against a ex-spouse.
Right.
And now because it had a sign saying it was in whatever town, that spouse could find them, right? Or people took pictures of their house and the house number was behind them. These are things that are, quote, not the fault of a Facebooker per se, but it's something that's pretty obvious. Here, however, is a design decision that I will say was made, certainly probably by Mark Zuckerberg.
Right.
Hey, at some point there was a meeting. Picture this meeting because it definitively happened, maybe a series of meetings. The millions of photos that people are taking, a lot of them have kids. A lot of them are showing situations that are a little bit whatever, along with having the, you know, uh, aspects of people posting photos.
Right.
A lot of the photos contain people who aren't on Facebook at all.
Right.
Then Zuckerberg said, well, let's make this opt out. This was an advertising money based decision. End of story. He knew. I don't care what anyone says,
Yeah.
him included, because then what that meant is millions of people who weren't on the tool couldn't get their pictures removed.
Right.
Then people who liked the tool were like, what do you mean by opt out?
Right.
What does that even mean? And then this complex thing. And then the photos were there. So now fast forward to November, whatever it was, 2022, beyond the shadow of any doubt. Sam Altman and OpenAI knew, let's release this thing. And someone said, anthropomorphism, because by the way, it's like Stanford behavioral economics.
Sure.
If you get people to think a tool is alive, the dopamine goes up, the scroll takes longer, they use your tool longer.
Yeah.
So maybe someone said it, maybe they didn't, they were shushed, and the tool moved forward. Yeah. Then, in the case of OpenAI, I'm speaking for myself, not my company, when these different mental health harms happened, the tools there weren't talk of moratoriums then.
Yeah.
Now the moratoriums are about the IPOs. And when kids were being harmed, and there was this beautiful opportunity at that point, I would have been like, good on you. You should have done this before it was released. But they could have said, not guardrails. You can't use these tools unless parents and caregivers are given this instruction.
Right.
All of those things working in PR, it's not just legal liability. Could have been, we care about your kids. This is a new paradigm to your earlier point. This is the MTV of this generation. Good analogy. But what MTV didn't do was, in different ways I can say they did, but automatically, anytime I turned on a video to watch MTV, drastically affect my local grid and water.
Right.
Did not automatically make my kids in the next generation think that MTV itself was a literal deity. They did not say, hey, Sting is actually Jesus. Sting is Allah. Or they didn't say the music is now becoming conscious, not metaphorically. They did not say, hey, every music artist out there, you're going to hear from Sting and the Police, then you're going to hear from Prince, and then you're going to hear from non-Sting and non-Prince, because we have stolen their work and replicated it, and we don't have to pay their rights anymore,
right.
Which is what Anthropic did.
Right.
But this is where I get a little passionate, because I sound, he's the angry guy. But the things now about like how someone feels when they use these tools is important and relevant. But I gotta say, it's like saying, and I'll use this analogy, maybe it's harsh, but giving someone heroin and then saying, do you like the heroin? And then people going, let's defend the heroin.
Right.
My answer is I'm not in any way going to be negative to addiction, having struggled with food and alcohol at times. But I am going to say I would hope that the caregiving that's prioritized can shift. And at a positive note, as we get to the end of this,
Yeah.
there's still time. I like using the term God rails, God, God rails, which are not about deifying the tools, but saying, who's the God in you, JT, faith wise? Who's the God? And well, I don't mean a male authoritarian figure. I mean
Sure.
a presence, indigenous, spiritual, that says, hold on, everyone. Maximizing machines means taking a breath and saying, what do we need? All of us. We need water. We need to live and exist in a place where we can breathe air. We
Yeah.
need species to survive, not because we love animals, but because birds carry seeds in their poop, and that's how trees get planted. That gives us oxygen. And then we have the opportunity, the sacred opportunity, because what happens when the tools don't work,
Yeah.
which is happening more and more while I live in Jersey when the grid shuts down,
Right.
is to say, JT is awesome, because I believe this.
I appreciate
Trying to
that.
let John
No
rail on your
problem.
show.
No, gracious me. I appreciate. I'm not used to it. I come from a family where it's where so I appreciate you saying these wonderful things about me. I'm not sure I can handle
I
it.
believe it, and I so appreciate the show. And my final point will be to say, for all your viewers and listeners, first of all, thank you. I get intense, and my amazing wife Gabrielle will say, "Hand on knee," to calm down. And what I want to say is, not talking about Gen AI or any technology. Me, John, my personal belief is you watching this show, and especially if you have the wisdom to, sign up to someone like JT, who's such a fun person to interact with, and I've learned so much from you. You have worth because you breathe. That's my belief. And you have the opportunity to expand your flourishing. Here it is by helping someone else. That's what the science says, empirical, tested science. When you help someone else, your well-being goes up. Is it a trick? No. If you're doing it for selfish reasons, use a different term, right? The point is you're doing it for self building of worth things. And then when you help the planet in any small way, saying maybe I don't need to use the most powerful type of Gen AI, but I can use an open weight model,
Sure.
get my same task done, right? And you're making those choiceful things. That's how to maximize machines now. That's how to embrace a artificial intelligence or a flourishing, and recognizing that you can never be replaced. Your worth, your tasks, your skills, you are the only you in the world, and you're the only you that can affect those in your community, whether it be in that beautiful bakery or wherever else, where that one word, that one moment that you give to someone else in joy, in community, is why we have, why we're here.
No, I appreciate the insight. I mean, I was going to ask you this question, but you kind of answered it. And this I wrote this after looking at your book, right? I was like, the central promise of your artificial intelligence seems to be that machines increasingly resemble us. But maybe your book asks the opposite question, and it's
Yeah,
like,
no, yeah.
as machines become more capable of imitating humanity, what must human beings do to become more fully human, right? And so I said, and then I was like, in nearly a decade after, this was the sort of closing. I know you got to go in 3 minutes, but it was like after writing artificial intelligence, has your answer to that question changed? That was the closing question of the.
That's a great question. I'll answer quickly, which is absolutely. Unless someone knows that they're interacting with a machine, that's an agency that if it's not there, it denies the gift either way. Like, meaning, let's say someone says, I believe AI and whatever manifestation of robots are real, sentient, godlike. In the same way they might say Allah, Jesus, Buddha, whatever. That's their truth. Disclosure is not about legalese.
Yeah.
Disclosure is saying, I care about you enough to recognize I believe this. Maybe most people do, but free will means I can't force you into a religion. It's like dating. You can introduce someone to someone in two friends that you think might hit it off, but you can't say you will be in love, right?
Yeah.
Um, so I bring all that up to say that the watermarking thing, unfortunately, Anthropic pirated 7, 8 million books, two of mine, and I wish they had done the watermarking thing then, because if they had said, "Hey, John, 8 million authors getting an email," me included, we'd like to watermark your books with Penguin and Wiley.
Right.
And all that means is whatever it means for money and stuff, because these things are changing in some small way. We want to give you credit because we're training our tool that
Right.
we now have a $1 trillion IPO apparently on to build the basis of our business. And okay, but rather than pirate or steal or anything else, what do you think? Send back this email if you're okay with us using your book to train our models. And here's this symbol posted on LinkedIn. I'm part of the new revolution because thanks, John. In some small way, someone's going to prompt about AI or ethics.
Yeah, that's
It's
fantastic.
different, right?
Yeah, it's a different feel.
And they could have done it. And you know
Yeah.
what would have happened? I can't speak for all the other authors. I would have been like, well, I got to talk to my publisher, but yeah. And I would have said, thank you.
Yeah.
And so watermarking, final point, as I've said like 4 times, but and thank you so much for this opportunity to speak to you and to be on your show.
It's fantastic
The,
to talk
the
with you.
watermark, the watermark is our spirit.
Yeah.
However, someone would say that the water, and we are what, 70% water. So
Sure.
the physical and spiritual aspect of us, that watermark, there's only one JT, only one John Havens, John C. Havens.
Yeah.
And where that can be honored as, not just intellectual property, but a form of identity and beauty.
Acknowledgement, I mean that it's the
Knowledge,
combination of who you are and the work you've done and the profound moment, this moment in time where you've gotten to hear, and it's the culmination of all these different things, right? That transected your life, good, bad, and ugly. I'm not being pejorative in that statement, but we
yeah,
all go through ups and downs, and so it's tough to be reductive or to be reduced by an entity, a company, or and have your and be devalued by with the fact that you're not there's not lack of acknowledgement. But I really do appreciate you taking the time. I know you have to go, so I don't want to go over, but we'll be reaching out and I'll send you all the we'll continue the conversation. But thank you so much.
it's my pleasure, JT. And I'm serious. I can't wait to be at your bakery and
Yeah,
have the.
you're right around the corner, so we'll figure it out. I'll
All right.
shoot you a text and
There's
we'll
got
go.
to be some good pun on heartificial that's like smell official.
Yeah, punofficial. We'll figure it out. So long. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, my friend. I got to run to the call, but thank you. Thank you. Such a pleasure.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you. All right, so long.
Okay.
Bye.
Talk to you soon.